It's my nerd world, and welcome to it, a Star Wars show. All hail R5D4. I'll explain. Mandalorian, Episode 2 of Season 3 and The Bad Batch both deliver in ways that I was not expecting. I'll give you my thoughts. We'll get into a little bit of listener feedback on this week's show. Thank you so much for joining me. Let us embark into that galaxy far, far away. That was super cheesy, I know.
Nothing will stand in our way.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
I will finish what you started.
Who are you? I'm no one.
There are stories about what happened.
It's true. All of it.
The Force. It's calling to you.
My Nerd World.
Just let it in.
It is my nerd world, and welcome to it. I'm your host, Jon Justice, here for another episode of a Star Wars show. We have some rumors, well, actually not rumors, there's some news to discuss, and then I'll share with you my thoughts of The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch, which, again, this week I thought were just absolutely fantastic on numerous levels. Let's start off with some news, though, which actually is rather odd juxtaposed against the high praise that I'm going to give both of this week's new Star Wars episodes. From Variety, a Star Wars shakeup. Kevin Feige and Patty Jenkins movies shelved. Taika Waititi looking to star in his own film. Now, I'm not going to get into the details of the article. I'll just kind of give you the overview of what's going on. So there was an announcement a while back that Kevin Feige would be producing his own Star Wars movie. It's been long said that Kevin Feige, who was the head of Marvel, and he's in charge of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and is the individual that's crafted that, which had worked so well right up until this most recent batch of films, which is not going well, which might be the reason why his movie's been shelved. But there was talk that he was going to be producing a Star Wars film sometime down the road. There was also discussion that Michael Waldron, who I believe worked on one of the Marvel shows, might have been Loki, I could be wrong on that, would be penning a script, may have written a script. But it appears that Kevin Feige's movie, whatever it was going to be, and the long talked about Rogue Squadron, which was officially announced years ago and then set aside, and then somebody else was going to direct it, and then Patty Jenkins was supposed to come back, and then it landed back on the schedule for release again. Now it's been shelved completely, which is so weird to me because you've got a film, you've got a script apparently, and you've made the announcement you're going to move forward, and you've just shoved that off to the side. My long shot conspiracy tinfoil hat on that one is Top Gun Maverick. That's my thought on the Patty Jenkins Rogue Squadron movie. Is that there was something to it that was very similar in the way that Top Gun Maverick was, and they didn't want to move forward with it for fears of comparison. I have no evidence of that apart from Patty Jenkins herself, who directed the Wonder Woman movies, saying that she wanted to make a fighter pilot movie and found the right story in Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Which is interesting because Top Gun Maverick really does play like a Star Wars movie. I've talked about this before on the show. Just the number of comparisons to the original Star Wars is pretty cool. And I love Top Gun Maverick. It was certainly my favorite film that's been released as of late, next to Avatar: The Way of Water. But I actually like Top Gun Maverick more than Avatar: The Way of Water for different reasons, be that as it may. The Taika Waititi news with all of this is a little strange. Looking to star in his own film, not sure if that means his own Star Wars film, whether that means his own film altogether. I think they're leaning towards him starring in his own Star Wars film, but the fingers, or the wind seems to be blowing towards Taika Waititi getting his movie before anybody else's, and yet there still are these rumors out there of the Damon Lindelof movie that has been talked about quite a bit within Hollywood and insiders on podcasts as well. All of this points to just an absolute mess as it relates to Lucasfilm and Disney trying to get their act together for a theatrical release. What's interesting to me is that when you look at the quality of what we're getting in Mando and the Bad Batch now, I feel like there's this sort of messy holdover. I'm getting ahead of myself in my commentary, and I'm going to go ahead and jump to the end of what I was going to say at the episode because it fits better here. Hat tip to the creators of Bad Batch and The Mandalorian. Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, where Book of Boba Fett was okay, and Obi-Wan Kenobi left me drier than the sands of Tatooine. Bad Batch and The Mandalorian are delivering now on levels that I didn't expect, and it just seems so odd to me given what a mess things appear to be on the film side. Now, in about a month, Star Wars Celebration will take place in Europe. They're not live streaming the panels this year, which I think just absolutely sucks. I look forward to Celebration every year and being able to sit at home and watch the panels, and this year they're not going to be live streaming any of them, and I don't understand the move to do that. They will be doing live streaming of Celebration, but it'll be everything outside of the panels, and I know they want to make it special for the people that are there, but considering the potential that we're going to be getting this news about the upcoming film releases, I would have liked to have seen it streamed. Be that as it may, we're not going to. We should know in about a month from now what Disney and Lucasfilm's long-term plans are going to be in terms of theatrical releases. Right now, it just looks like it's a big old mess, and perhaps this report from Variety is sort of, let's clear the way. Let's get this stuff out of the way before we make the announcement, because we actually have a plan to put out there, so let's just make sure everybody knows Rogue Squadron's not happening, Kevin Feige's movie's not happening, we're still looking at Taika Waititi, and then they'll announce everything that's going to happen. That's my hope and expectation, and as I've long said, I think Star Wars belongs on the big screen, and I've been a little down on Star Wars as of late. I had been enjoying The Bad Batch prior to the release of The Mandalorian, but like I said, the Book of Boba Fett and kind of left me flat. Obi-Wan Kenobi completely disappointed me, and I'd even put a few videos out asking if there was now room in the science fiction, fantasy, space opera genre for another IP to kind of come in and fill that space and sit there along with Star Wars. I don't think it's going to be Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon, for those that are familiar with that coming out later this year in December. That seems to be a little bit more adult, a little bit less fantasy, a little bit more violent, at least what we've seen so far of it, which would make sense for Zack Snyder. Army of the Dead, Man of Steel, Sucker Punch, Watchmen. It would make sense that he would have something that was a little bit more adult-oriented, but that was originally supposed to be a Star Wars project that he was pitching, and he just decided to create his own space opera. So I don't think that's going to be it, but perhaps Disney and Lucasfilm can get their act together and return Star Wars to its glory. At least on the small screen, they seem to be doing that. So, like I said, I hope that this, public acknowledgement that Kevin Feige and Patty Jenkins' Rogue One movies are not happening is a precursor to us getting some solid news on what we can expect in future theatrical releases. All right, one little bit of rumor, and then I'll dive into the content this week.
This is not going to go the way you think.
We still have filming going on of The Acolyte. There were some reports this week of location shooting for The Acolyte. We're also hearing that we should get the full, we should begin the full promotion of Ahsoka later this year. happening. That's premiering later this year, but we should get the start of the promotion for that at Star Wars Celebration, perhaps even a trailer. The rumor this week, not a big one. We'll know in less than a week. But The Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 3 is 56 minutes long. So there you go. Yeah, that was the only rumor this week, and I hope that's the case, because I think the longer the episode, the better, and that was certainly the case with this week's episode. So let's go ahead and talk a bit about The Mandalorian, Episode 2 of Season 3.
We are the spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
In these first 2 opening episodes, this season is firing on all cylinders. Certainly not ready to say if I like it more than any other seasons. Having rewatched Seasons 1 and 2, I think I like Season 2 a little bit more than Season 1. I thought that last week's Episode 1 episode was solid, got a lot accomplished, really tapped into what this Star Wars fan was hoping for, and giving us a lot of different aspects of Star Wars that I love. And Episode 2 as well did not disappoint on that level. Din is on a quest, and as I mentioned on last week's episode, I love the parallels that we're getting now in Din Djarin's journey to a Jedi, and specifically Luke and Rey's journey. We have mythology now that we can chew on. We have a difference in viewpoints of this mythology. It's not a one-to-one comparison between dark side and light side, but there certainly is a different belief system within the Mandalorian culture that's running and bumping helmets against each other between Bo-Katan and what she believes, and what Din Djarin and the Mandalorian believes. And I'm really enjoying this. As I said before, I don't know if I just missed it, but I love the fact that we are now getting this Star Wars story with Mandalorians that's very much in the same depth of mythology that we would get with the Jedi. We have something to chew on now. We have something to speculate on. And I love that aspect of Star Wars, the aspect of the Force. I love my spaceships. I love my pew, pew, pew. But I also love that that mythological part of it, and the belief part of it, and Din going on this quest, and how important it is for him to, this is the way, for him to achieve this task in order to bring himself back into the fold of the Mandalorian, and how important it is for him, whether it be symbolic or whether it be somehow tied to the Force. And I'm really, really enjoying this season within 2 episodes of that aspect of the storytelling. Before we get further into that, let's talk a little bit about the opening of the episode. We end up on Tatooine, right around Boonta Eve. Of course, reference back from The Phantom Menace. We see some land speeders, racing around inside of the city there on Tatooine. You get the haggling with the Rodian over the fixing of the land speeder, and of course she's pulling a fast one on him because he had the Jawas go and steal the parts for it, and keeping with her character, with the mechanic characters. Pelimoto, am I getting her name right? Pelimoto, is that right? Of course, the Mandalorian shows up. He needs help. Hasn't been able to get IG-11 back up to working order yet. And this is what got me so excited, just as from a personal standpoint as a fan. R5D4. R5D4, as a little kid, watching Star Wars for the first time, still have the action figure behind me with my vintage collection figures, meant the world to me. Having been exposed to the Star Wars universe and wanting to take in as much as possible of Star Wars, and having so much scarcity surrounding it, not being able to pull something up on a phone or go on a computer, and no, you had your toys to play with. This is how you imagined everything. And R2-D2 being such a central character, and loving that character so much, and then knowing there are other types of R2 units out there, right? Anything added to Star Wars and what you had was a benefit, right? Seeing different types of spaceships. Darth Vader's advanced TIE fighter looks different than the regular TIE fighter. I mean, all these things just had this magical quality to it as a kid because, again, there was a scarcity, and R5D4 kept that magic alive in me because I loved that character so much because it was R2-D2, but it wasn't R2-D2, and he wasn't on the screen for very long, but we still got an action figure, and he was red where R2 was blue, and I remember as a kid, it was just so awesome, and here now we have, after all these decades, for me personally, little John gets his little adventure with R5D4, and they keep with this personality of being kind of messed up, as Christian Harloff says on the Sith Council podcast, sort of a trash droid. He's kind of messed up, and he's scared. But it was just such a fun little journey to go on with him as Din is going on his quest, and it was almost like a realization of a dream that came true that I didn't know I had of having an R5D4 adventure after all of this time. And I just thought it was magical for me as a 50-year-old man thinking back to my 5- and 6-year-old self and my R5D4 toy that my parents had purchased for me. Grogu, we see now, is more adept with the Force. He's more responsible for himself. That certainly plays out throughout the episode. We end up traveling to the Mandalorian home world. Echoes of The Empire Strikes Back as he's landing the modified Naboo starfighter on the planet and going through the storms and having the shots that were very reminiscent to Luke landing on Dagobah when he crashed in The Empire Strikes Back. And then we get this amazing quest into the unknown. I thought the planet itself looked really unique and different with all of the green crystals. Reminded me a lot of like Wizard of Oz. We get these battles with these very sort of Sid and Marty Krofft-esque Star Wars creatures that completely work within the Star Wars universe and are believable within the canon of what we're used to seeing of Star Wars characters. We see how much Din Djarin is struggling with the Darksaber and still can't wield it, which comes into play a little bit later on in the episode. And then we end up coming into contact with this creepy mechanical nemesis. Echoes of General Grievous when he leaves his larger machine and takes on his smaller personal form and captures Din Djarin to suck the blood out of him. I mean, it got dark in this episode. Grogu then tasked with having to go and save him, and all these little moments from the first episode and this episode of Season 2 begin to come into play as the Mandalorian is teaching him the ways of the Mandalorian, but also the ways of flying his ship and navigation and where the planets are. We get, all of these setups foreshadowing what Grogu has to do as he has to leave with R5D4 to go find Bo-Katan. And it's just a fun little moment showing how independent Grogu is now and how much he's grown in the time that he was with Luke Skywalker, which there's some controversy about. They could have potentially been like 2 years, according to what Jon Favreau has said, that Grogu could have been training with Luke. But again, as Luke said in those episodes during the Book of Boba Fett, it was more Grogu remembering what he was taught before more than it was his being trained anything new. I love the fact that as we got to spend more time with Bo-Katan in this episode, they're doing, in my opinion, a much better job with her character. She's still very strong and independent, but she's not as crass. She's got a sympathetic side to her that we saw a little bit within the Clone Wars, but is playing out here more in this episode. So I originally was kind of lukewarm on Bo-Katan when she appeared in Season 2, but I like the fact that they're handling this character in a much different way. There may be some other motivations that haven't been revealed yet. Her traveling to the Mandalorian homeworld and seeing what Din Djarin is seeing, that it is breathable. They could potentially go and rebuild it. But I liked the fact that she showed up wanting to shun Mando away when he arrived, when she thought he was arriving back at the castle on the subsequent planet near the homeworld, only to find out that it was just Grogu there needing her help. When Bo-Katan arrives on the Mandalorian homeworld, we do sort of a retrace of the journey that Din Djarin had just gone on as they traveled down into what remains of Mandalore. But it's different. We get to see this time around, even though we're retracing our steps from just a few minutes earlier in the episode, we get to see how skilled Bo-Katan is, especially compared to Din Djarin as she takes on those creatures. Still ends up having a pretty intense battle with that mechanical nemesis that we mentioned before. But when she wields the Darksaber, she knows how to wield it. She's had experience with it. And I thought for a moment she was going to keep it. But as we see, when the Mandalorian finally is rescued and gets his senses back, he's got the Darksaber back attached with him. And I think she understands that he hasn't learned quite how to wield it yet. But she was certainly adept at wielding, much more capable of wielding the Darksaber than he was. And again, to one end, is she willing to help the Mandalorian? Because here she ends up actually going and, while pushing back on him a bit of his beliefs, of having to go into the waters of the mines of Mandalore to redeem himself. She thinks it's all kind of a bunch of, hocus pocus nonsense, right? When they arrive there, she even says, I'll go ahead and give you the full treatment. And she reads the plaque and what the waters mean as Din Djarin, wanders in to go bathe in the waters. I made a joke to the family when we were watching it that it would have been funny if Grogu in his pod had given Mandalorian a bottle of bubbles because he was going to go bathe in the waters. Yeah, it landed about as well with my family as it did for you while you were listening. But of course, it's not so simple. Din Djarin ends up falling. Either he's taken by the mythosaur or he ended up falling, and it just ended up. We kind of couldn't decide whether or not he was walking and he met a drop off and he sunk, or if the mythosaur had actually grabbed him. But Bo-Katan dives in to save him. And I have to say, again, going back and criticizing Obi-Wan Kenobi a bit, I said out loud when the episode was over, how can this be so good in terms of production and story writing, where just Obi-Wan Kenobi fell flat. Even when Bo-Katan was going through the waters and finding him, I mean, it looked cinematic and so much better than what it did when Obi-Wan Kenobi was heading into the Inquisitorius in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. Of course, she rescues Din Djarin, and then what do we see? The appearance of the mythosaur before they arrive back on land. And this, of course, as we know, was foreshadowed long ago when the Armorer had said that the appearance of the mythosaur would usher in a new era of Mandalorian. And like I said, maybe I didn't see it as much before. We got a little bit of the history of the Mandalorian in previous seasons, but I really am loving the fact that, again, we're getting this Star Wars story. Now we've got the mythology attached to it. We have sort of a different mix on dark side and light side, and we have something that we can speculate on and look forward to. And I'm excited that we've gotten this portion of his journey out of the way. I was with a lot of people that thought that the quest for Din to end up at the mines and bathe in the water was going to take most of the season. And it seems like, no, we got a long way to go. If we're getting this out of the way this early, then what are we to expect coming up in the rest of the season, considering that in episode 2 we've already sort of handled? I'm assuming him going in the water and spending as much time in there as he did is going to be enough for him to get back into the good graces of the Mandalorians. So what does this mean for the rest of the series? So that I am very much looking forward to finding out. So before we move over to Bad Batch, what do you think? Leave a comment up on YouTube or drop me an email, TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. Again, TalkShowNerd at gmail.com.
Something inside me has always been there. But now it's awake. And I need help.
I don't want to spend a ton of time on Bad Batch except to say what an incredibly powerful episode. When we started this new season, I hadn't really had the desire to go back and rewatch any of them. Like, I watched episode 1 of The Mandalorian twice, if not 3 times now, and I'm definitely going to be rewatching episode 2 of season 3 later on today. But with this episode, along with the other Crosshair episode, there's a part of me that wishes that they would have made this a smaller season and we dispensed with some of the non-main storyline shows, but at the same time, those were really good as well. This episode, though, the way in which they're handling Crosshair and his turn, which I assume is going to lead him back to Clone Force 99, is nothing short of masterful storytelling. I've never had animation grip me and be in such a way that this episode did. It was a slow burn, but so worth it in the end. Just watching this journey of Crosshair and what they are able to do within this animation. Heartbreaking to see the way the clones are being treated, and Crosshair begin to realize that he is now included in that as the Empire moves forward and away from the clones with this horrible, atrocious Imperial officer. But that by the end of the episode, spoiler alert, we were all sitting around going, I hope he shoots him. we were all rooting for him to take him down, and of course he did. And I was glad that we got that scene right at the end of the episode where he's taken to Mount Tantus. And if you recall, the Bad Batch themselves have said they need to go back to Mount Tantus at some point. So I imagine that eventually when they do, they'll be reunited with a Crosshair, and he will go and rejoin them. Interesting, though, the clone doctor that we met, the female doctor who we met in a previous episode, who was at the very, very end of this Bad Batch episode, reminded me an awful lot of Omega. She says Omega, it's Omega. My son Kyle pointed out that she sounded like her, and when I looked at her, she actually, her animated complexion was a little bit darker, and her hair color was darker, but she sounded a bit like her and looked like her too. So, again, I'm really, really intrigued as to where the rest of this season is going, and I hope that we maintain this consistent storytelling arc and we don't deviate off on some missions that don't have anything to do with the main storyline. But as I said at the start of the show, I'll repeat it here. Hat tip to the creators of these shows. As somebody who was, again, getting a little bit down on my beloved Star Wars and wasn't all that impressed, and to the point where I was, kind of wondering, well, maybe we need to get something new out there. These shows have really brought back some of that magic that, in my opinion, has been missing for a while, and I hope we can get it back on the big screen. TalkShowNerd at gmail.com. Leave a comment up on YouTube. Let's go ahead and get to some listener feedback this week.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
All right. JCVal93 says, this episode, episode 1 of Season 3, gets an A+. I wish it could have been longer, but that's okay. The space battle sequence was great. Thought of the Falcon navigating through the asteroid field in Empire Strikes Back, or the Death Star 2 battle in Return of the Jedi. The pirate ship, I liked. The design is similar to the paintings done by Chris Foss. Yep, absolutely agree. The designer and artist who did a lot of space paintings in the 70s and 80s. Yeah, absolutely, especially the paint scheme on that. It was good to watch a riveting, engaging Star Wars show again. Don't get me wrong, Andor was very good, but I got to admit there were times it felt like a Star West Wing Wars. Hard to say, Star West Wing Wars. So this episode was a much-needed change, and I hope it continues. Keep up the great work. It's so funny because I hadn't even included any of Andor in my conversation as it relates to the Star Wars entities or shows that have been released. And I know a lot of people loved Andor, and I enjoyed Andor. I thought it was good for what it was, but it just didn't have the Star Wars magic that this fan wants. I won't say needs, but wants. It was good Star Wars storytelling, and there were certainly a couple of episodes that hit the mark for me, but in terms of what I expect from Star Wars, that science fiction fantasy element, the fantasy part of Andor was missing. It was what it is, it needs to be, and I look forward to Season 2. There's only going to be one more season of Andor, by the way. That being said, Mandalorian and Bad Batch are delivering on those levels where, in my opinion, Andor did not. Friend of the show, SheVP writes, that's high magistrate, Grief Karga. John, LOL. Yeah, I know, I just said magistrate. It was so good, and I'm happy with how they addressed Cara Dune's absence. I was hoping she'd get a promotion for bringing in Gideon, and that's exactly what happened, so I loved it. I was listening to the leaks for next week, and holy cow, it sounds incredible. Yeah, I avoided all those leaks, thankfully. I had read that the Mythosaur was going to show up, but I'm glad we didn't get sort of full-on Mythosaur. We just kind of got a glimpse of Mythosaur. Supposedly, the back half of the season is going to be absolutely wild. Yeah, it appears that way. Hope your leg is doing better. It is. It's still bruised, but I can walk on it now. You're in my prayers as always. Thank you, my friend. Thank you very much, GVP. I greatly appreciate it. All right, that wraps up the show again this week. Thank you so much for checking it out. As always, if you want to leave a comment, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. If for some reason this is the first time you've been listening to this show, welcome to it. I am also an author, and I write a science fiction space opera series. And so if you want to support my nerd world, you can do so by checking out EMBARK. EMBARK is a science fiction epic with a little bit of romance and filled with action, written for adults but great for ages 11 plus. 7 books in the series. Book 8 is being written right now. Yes, I've gotten back to writing. Do not have a timeline, but I'm working on a new story. They're available in ebook, hardcover, paperback, and audiobook on Amazon.com or Jon Justice EMBARK at Amazon.com, or go to mynerdworld.net. Follow a ragtag squadron of pilots as they fight for survival among the stars and a future, and fight for humanity's future. Boy, I screwed that up, didn't I? Follow a ragtag squadron of pilots as they, on a journey of survival across the stars as they fight for their future. There you go. Book 1's description is as follows. The stars are within reach as rival megacorporations, D-Corp and Intercon, have made interstellar travel available to the masses. I promise you that my narration of the books is better than my description here. But when an industrial accident sets off an apocalyptic chain of events, all of Earth is at risk. Meanwhile, Taft picked the right day to upgrade his ship when fellow pilot Kate Amaro arrived needing his help investigating a cryptic message from her late aerospace engineer father. Unaware of the disaster, Taft and Catha make a shocking discovery. Excitement turns to fear as the global evacuation begins and the ruthless Synargum of D-Corp learns of the power in their possession. Taft soon realizes what Catha's father left behind might be the only key to saving Earth's evacuees from the tyranny of D-Corp's evil leader. Taft has found something, and humanity won't survive without it. Again, Amazon.com, look for Jon, Jon Justice, or go to mynerdworld.net. You can follow me on social media, too, at Jon Justice or at TheMyNerdWorld. You can also find me on both my Instagram pages under those, at The Jon Justice and at TheMyNerdWorld on Instagram, and TikTok at The Jon Justice as well. Thank you so much for checking out this week's show. We're back again next week with my thoughts on The Bad Batch next episode and episode 3 of The Mandalorian Season 3. Until then, I hope wherever you are, you're happy, you're healthy, and you are safe. Talk to you then. Bye.
The Force will be with you, always.
My Nerd World.